Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started just to give you guys as much time. Thank you so much for being here. This is a presentation you guys have done at the college before, and we've caught wind about it, and it's great to have you here, especially given the historical relationship that has existed between this congregation and the college. And we're just really glad to have you here with us. So you can take some time to introduce yourself. Thanks, Rachel, for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, of course.
All right, so we'll just go ahead and get started. So welcome to researching and reporting BIPOC student history at Elizabethtown College. As the pastor mentioned, my name is Rachel Grove Rohrbaugh, and I'm the archivist at Elizabethtown College. I already know many of you, but also nice to meet people I haven't met before. So this morning, two students, Kaylin Tendo and Jordan Ducko, are going to share their recent research on the history of students of color at Elizabethtown College. And this research has been showcased in a spring exhibit that's still on view in the High Library. It's on the main floor, so if you come in our main entrance, we'll point you to it. And this exhibit is called Preserving the Stories of Etown Students and Alumni of Color. The exhibit includes oral history interviews as well as information about early BIPOC alumni, influential faculty and staff, student clubs, activism, and much more. The exhibit also features the work of the Etown Church of the Brethren Racial Justice Working Group. I think some of the members of that group are here today, so thank you. And that research focuses on Etown's history as a sundown town that used various methods, including racial covenants, to keep Blacks from living here in the first half of the 20th century. The exhibit is open until May 16th, so you still have time to get over to the High Library and see it. Actually, I think we're open this afternoon if you want to go after church. Jordan's talk today will focus on her research on the lives of early BIPOC students, faculty, and staff. And Kaylin will then share clips and observations from our oral history interviews with alumni of color. Jared. Oh, yes, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Thank you. Yeah. So it's a quick way of saying a lot of people. Kaylin Tendo is a sophomore legal studies major. He completed a SCARP, so that's our summer research program at Etown. We call SCARP. I forget what the acronym stands for. Scholarly. Yeah. Anyway, that's how I'm research. Yeah. Research program. And it was in the Hess Archives where I work in the High Library. And he worked on that last summer, and actually he's going to join us again this summer as well. And then Jordan is a junior history and political science major, and she's minoring in public heritage studies and international studies. And Jordan joined the project in the fall of 2024 as the Young Center's Ziegler Fellow, and she's continued to work on the project this semester. The project was made possible with support from the High Library, the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies, the Office of Civil Rights, Opportunity and Access, as well as the Office of Alumni Relations at the college. Thank you to the faculty and staff in these offices for everything you've done to make this work possible. Thank you also to the alumni who have so far been willing to share their stories, and they include Rosalind Griffin, 61, Paul Rice, 55, David Jackson, 73, Charles Mock, 75, Albert Granger, 83, Kenneth Tendo, 94, Corey Reed, 04, Aaron Blanding, 09, and Adrian McClellan from the class of 2011. So please be aware that this presentation includes a discussion of racist incidents and examples of some racial slurs. Elizabethtown College does not endorse this content, but is committed to preserving the full historical record with the hope that we can learn from past injustices and engage in more truthful conversations about history. So we'll get started, and Jordan will share her research first.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. So as Rachel mentioned, most of my research revolved around some of the early students, faculty, and staff of color. So with that, we will get right into it, starting with the students and alumni. So Domingo Diggett was from the Philippines. He was the first student of color to attend Elizabethtown College in 1905. However, he was not the college's first international student. John Berberian, an Armenian from Turkey, also attended during the same year. He lived and later worked in Elizabethtown, and his son, Dr. Harry Berberian, graduated from Elizabethtown in 1942. Dickett was initially enrolled as a student at the St. Francis Vocational School for Boys in Edenton, Pennsylvania. His former teacher from the Philippines tried to get him transferred to the Carlisle Indian School, but he never actually enrolled there. With the help of that teacher, he got into Elizabethtown College, attending during the 1905-1906 academic year. He played on the college's first baseball team and worked as a mail carrier, laborer, and farmhand to earn money. At that time, it was typical for students to only attend for a year or two before obtaining a job. So he returned to the Philippines in 1907, where he worked as assistant auditor of the Philippine National Bank and served as secretary-treasurer of the Philippine Board of Accountancy. Next, we have Charles Jenkins, class of 1930. And Jenkins was Etown's first African-American student and person of color to graduate from the college. Before his time at Etown, he initially graduated from the Virginia Theological Seminary and conducted additional theological work at the University of Chicago School of Divinity. He began his ministry at the First Baptist Church in Kowalski, Virginia. While a student here, he served as pastor of the Second Baptist Church of Harrisburg. At the time of his graduation, he was 41 years old and married with 2 children. After graduation, he left for a church in Pittsburgh. Then, in 1936, came to the Second Baptist Church of Ohio, one of the oldest and most influential Black Baptist churches in the state. He served as pastor there until 1971 and had a major impact on the church and its congregation. According to records, membership tripled under his leadership, and he initiated various improvement projects on the church building. He was active in numerous local, state, and national organizations as a member of the Ohio Baptist Convention, the Frontiers, the Bull, the Spring Street YMCA Board, and the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority Board during the later part of his life. Jenkins was also a distinguished academic, awarded honorary doctorate degrees from 3 schools, including Elizabethtown College in 1955. Next, we have William Miller Barber, class of 1932, and Barber was a prominent civil rights pioneer. He was a popular student during his time at Etown, involved in numerous sports and clubs, including the short-lived football team, basketball team, debating team, and yearbook staff. He graduated with a degree in education and went on to pursue a master's degree at the University of Pennsylvania, where he tirelessly worked to end gang violence and promote the arts among African-American youth. He held a career in social work during the 1940s, which inspired him to get involved in civil rights organizing with the National Urban League. He was promoted to director of the Urban League in Denver, Colorado, and then further promoted to head of the Urban League's Western region in Pasadena, California. His work primarily highlighted racial and ethnic discrimination in housing and employment, long before such ideas became widespread. These ideas, in turn, went on to become the major ideological foundations of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. His writings are cited in many academic works and books related to civil rights organizing, and he was truly a passionate leader with a commitment to bring about lasting change in the communities he worked with. Next, we have Daniel Scott, also class of 1932. And like Charles Jenkins, he made significant contributions to the Black Baptist Church during his career. After his graduation, he moved to Chester, Pennsylvania, where he served as pastor of the Bethany Baptist Church beginning in 1939. He left a significant impact on this church community, as many of the organizations he founded within it still exist today, including the Daniel Chorus, 49ers Club, Christian Workers Club, and President's Council. He also helped significantly expand the church's property and presence in the area. Next, we have Sally Johnson and Mildred Holloway, class of 1954. And these 2 women were the first women of color to graduate from Elizabethtown College. They both transferred here during their junior year from Piney Woods Junior College in Piney Woods, Mississippi. Piney Woods Junior College, now known as the Piney Woods School, was founded in 1909 to provide affordable education to African-American youth. Currently, it serves grades 9 to 12 and is one of the oldest of just 4 remaining historically Black boarding schools in the country. In our interview with Paul Rice 55, We learn that college president A.J. Bacher may have had connections to Piney Woods through the Church of the Brethren, which could have been how Holloway and Johnson learned about Etown. Both women were popular students who were active in the campus community. They ran a campus chess fund drive that benefited the World Service Students Fund and Piney Woods Junior College in 1953, were saxophone players in the college band, and Johnson was elected May Queen by her peers in 1954. Holloway returned to work at the Piney Woods School after graduating with a degree in business, then moved to Riverside, California, where she was employed by the County Board of Education as a budget and fiscal services manager. Additionally, in 1956, 2 years after their graduation, Isaiah Ebersol Oberholzler, a key figure within the Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren community, served at the Piney Woods School. Next, we will transition over to highlighting some of the early influential faculty and staff of color at Elizabethtown. John Jasper Sperling was the first faculty member of color at Elizabethtown College. He served as an assistant professor of sociology during the 1956-1957 academic year, and before accepting his position at Elizabethtown, he worked at Columbia University and Johnson C. Smith University. He was a member of the Library Faculty Committee during his time here, and left after only that year to continue his doctoral studies. Robert C. Chung served as an assistant and associate professor of psychology from 1971 to 1981. He previously worked as a psychiatric social worker and a juvenile court counselor before accepting his position at Elizabethtown, and he was chair of the psychology department during his time here. He had a strong interest in studying and helping the mentally ill, which he attributed to his assignments before becoming a professor. Maurice Hoppy served as an assistant and associate professor of economics from 1981 to 2006, also serving as associate chairperson of the business department during his time here. Born in Guyana, South America, Hoppy came to the United States in 1969 to pursue a teaching career. He ended up in Elizabethtown because college president Mark Ebersol's brother was vice president of finance at the University of Tennessee, where Hoppy studied and initially worked. Through this connection, he learned about an opening in the business department at Elizabethtown and obtained the job through this connection. He was known for his interactive teaching style and encouraging students to think critically and innovatively, which earned him a great deal of respect from students and faculty alike. He left a lasting impact on the business department throughout his work. Alberta B. Jack was one of the first women of color employed by the college from 1969 to 1970. Known to her students as Mrs. Jack, she was a counselor in counseling services who many of students of color turned to for help. She was mentioned in the 18 Demands student protests of 1970, which Kaylin will talk about later, where Black students advocated for her to receive a salary increase comparable to others in her department. And you can see the text here with her name highlighted in the 18 Demands. Min Liu was the first female faculty of color in the college's history. She was not hired until the year 2000. She served as an assistant professor of sociology and anthropology from 2000 to 2003. While the college has recently made significant strides in terms of hiring women faculty and staff of color, this highlights a long overdue commitment to diversity and inclusion in the academic environment. As a part of the college's 125th anniversary, it's important to uplift these stories and voices to ensure they're not forgotten, because they have left such a tangible and lasting impact on our institution as a whole. We recognize these individuals' contributions and honor them as prominent members of Elizabethtown College's history.
Hi everyone, I'm Caleb Bendo. So the interviews of past students from Etown. So basically kind of what she was doing was focusing more so on the students of the past. And so my research was kind of understanding how the community operated. So how the students were functioning within the community. How was that environment for them? Was it more of a safe space? Was it more of a hostile environment? So I was going through newspapers and looking through that first. So I was in those newspapers. I was trying to see what can I see what the students are saying about the school, because back then that was kind of the way that they interacted. Was they were to air out any grievances that they thought were important or imperative for people to know. They would do it in newspapers, because back then obviously they don't have phones, right? So because they don't, everyone was sitting down there and they would say so teachers would voice their opinions on stuff, students would voice their opinions on stuff. So there would be kind of people going back and forth. So it'd be one issue with the newspaper from 1 week would be a student saying that they would be addressing certain issues. And 8 demands was one way that they would talk about certain issues. They would address it there. then next week, on the next issue, there'd be students and teachers who would be commenting on those things. So that was like one of the biggest things we would be communicating. But as I understand that though, is that the newspaper is only one side of that information because there's more information that comes down to when you talk to people. So for us, we started from the newspapers, looking through doing keyword searches. So essentially, this would be me doing like certain words like African American or even like the N word and going through the newspaper and seeing like what people were saying to find that. And then from there, we kind of transferred over to like going and talking to people. So we had, I think it was about like maybe like 10 people about who, yeah, that we've interviewed so far.
Yeah.
And we had like just the conversation to figure out like the furthest of like what are people going around talking to one another. So in the first person that one of the first people we interviewed was Aaron Blanding. So he attended the school in like the 90s. He did graduate in 2009 though. But Aaron Blanding during his time here, he had an overall a good time. So the thing is at Elizabethtown College is that I wouldn't make the initial statement that the school is a racist institution because I believe from my research that a code is on a spectrum. You have it's good, you have it bad. You can't just take one instance and then use that to be able to address the whole entire school. So throughout my research, so what I had been seeing was that there are certain people, like certain people of color who had a good time and there's certain people of color who didn't. So Aaron Blanding, for his time here, he had an overall good time. And the thing is this, so for him, he had support, but it was not technically support from the faculty or support from his team. So he played on a sports team and they kind of provided for him in that instance because they gave him protection. So kind of what I saw and what I understood was like there were students that were on the campus who were racist. But the thing is like hey, when you have a certain support group on that campus, so that team and that those people were there with the agenda to make sure that you are safe, they kind of gave him that like safety net. So when he was operating within the campus, he didn't necessarily have to deal with issues going back and forth with people because they know that okay, if I mess with him, then the rest of the team is gonna come through and it will help him out. So it's like for him, it was he and the other students of color when they came on the campus, they had that support system. Now, Albert Granger, another student as well, who had the same type of instance where they have that support staff. So it's like one thing I definitely didn't understand is I wouldn't say that it was not all the faculty members who were very, very supportive for them in the instance. Now there were some, but it was that sometimes the students had to kind of depend on one another to be able to be supported. So it's like coming down to like the groups that were coming onto campus. So they had groups for students of color. So they had like Noir. So Noir was a student for like a group for African Americans to like inform them, but it wasn't just simply for Black students. It was just looking to like teach and engage on the entire campus. And in groups of that nature, they actually had majority white students in it, obviously because Etown was predominantly white, but it was still interesting to see though, as I'm doing my research, that they had more white students in like groups for Black students to be able to learn about Black students. So it did show that there was a willingness in Etown to learn, to be able to educate themselves about like students of color. Because during these periods of time, they also had like Black weekends, and Black weekends basically they had like times where they would invite like poets onto the campus. They would have speakers, dancers, all things of that nature about African American culture. And so they would have a whole entire weekend for this where they would just address topics and have conversations with the outer community. And it seemed that what I was seeing is in the newspapers too as well, that people were actually coming out of their way to participate and to join in and talk about these things because they thought it was important to them. So they came out of their way to go to every one of these events. So it was like I was also seeing that these things are actually being highly attended, which surprised me, especially during the time that it was going on, which was like in the 90s, where sometimes like having racist ideologies was to an extent accepted. So when it came down to understand the community, I had to understand that there's two separate things. You have the Etown Elizabethtown College community, but you also have the Etown community. And those two things, they kind of operated on different timings because the fact that the outer community wasn't as accepting as Etown College. So I was, to my understanding from also talking to people, that people of color couldn't necessarily go out at night during like the 90s and the early 90s. Like, it wasn't an acceptable thing because they could be receiving some type of hate or there could be some type of violence that could potentially occur. Like that was what was being implied. So most of the time, the students of color stayed on campus. It was like kind of like an unwritten rule that if you're going to go into campus community, like you need to make sure that you acknowledge that you're tell people that you're a student at the college. Because for some reason, when students were to go into shops, they would always ask, like they would specifically ask students of color, "Are you a member of the Town College?" So what I was wondering was that if this is the case and they're asking them this every single time they enter these shops, is it because if they weren't there, they would receive a different type of treatment? So it seemed that there might have been some type of like, okay, if this person's from the school, maybe we'll keep our hands off. And if that was the case, then maybe if they weren't, then there could have been some type of hostile treatment towards them. So that was one aspect of where I was trying to understand that. But then on top of that, though, there was like even times in the day where they wouldn't necessarily be welcome. So it was like really like them trying to gauge. Sometimes people just stayed on campus 24/7 because it feels safe to go out. So Albert Granger, he is also alumni here, so he's on the board of trustees. And so he did, again, one of the people who did have a generally good time here. So he didn't necessarily face a lot of people making racist comments towards him. But when he went into the town, he had a very interesting experience. So in this clip, that's what you'll see.
One thing that was kind of odd is I did go to the flea market downtown, in Elizabethtown. Is that they saw the flea market down there near the train station? Well,
Oh, I'm not
years ago
sure.
they said, yeah, they used to have a flea market, and the KKK had a booth.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I was like, oh my God, where am I? You know, but
And this would have been in the early 80s, late 70s.
yes, 79. Remember, I was there from 79 to 82. Mm-hmm. So,
That's crazy.
So
Yeah.
what did they have at a booth at a, just like
well,
sign
I
up?
even
and-
bought it. My uncle is the president of the NAACP for New York State at one time, but at the time he was regional, so he was in Suffolk County. So I bought him a little KKK plaque. I said, "Here you go." He's like, "Where'd you get that?" And I told him where I got it at school. I said, "Holy shit! Why'd you give those guys your money?" I said,
Oh yeah, because you bought it.
How much was
It
it?
was only $1. You know, it was a little,
Okay.
you know, it was a little disc, metal disc. You know, proud member KKK. You know, I went to the guy, sold it to me. He said, "Hey, how are you?"
He didn't even react to
didn't
your
care?
buy.
Just like,
Of course not.
he's just probably happy to take your money. That's honestly what that was.
Of course, of course. It was only like $1 or $2 or something. You know.
But that does say something, the fact that that stand could, that, probably tons of people were walking past and be like, oh yeah, there's.
You know, look, money drives everything. You know, so I came there with $1 bill. He'd take it. He didn't care. You know, it's a sad commentary, but that's the real reality of it. You know.
But yeah, so that kind of just like some aspects of how the community was operating at that period of time. So not to say the whole community was like that, but there were still instances where there were racist ideologies were very prevalent then at that time, and it didn't seem to be like a full outright issue for, like, as I said, like a KKK person to hold a stand there, because it's clear that some of our community has that type of sentiment, and if he's there and having his stuff, like, it's could have been inclined that there could have been something that was present within that space.
One thing that was.
So David Jackson is another person. So David Jackson, so as you mentioned earlier, that about the 18 demands, he was one of the students who was pursuing the 18 demands. And so for David Jackson, he was one of a very monumental figure within the town college history, just due to the fact of the things that he went through at his time here. Because the fact that he was one who kind of came up with the idea of the 18 demands, grabbing students together to like pursue that and kind of get those things through. He was now one of the students who did have a lot more of a harder time at the school because he did face dealing with a lot of racist comments at his time here. So he kind of like highlights onto how that other spectrum is on that other side is, because yes, people have their good in this instance, but the bad too, well, is still something that is very prevalent. So he kind of addresses that other aspect of the Elizabethtown community.
My time there was a nightmare, really, literally, because it was my first exposure to racism, and it was abundant and constant, consistent, and never ending.
What was one of the worst experiences that you dealt with through racism while you were on campus?
Well, I had decided that I would not be numbered among, there were only a handful of us, Black students there. I would decided that I would at least do something to elevate the focus on racism. So I began the withdrawal process. And at that time, you had to sit with this one, this dean, and that one, and the other one to explain the reason for your withdrawal. And that gave me the opportunity to introduce the concept of racism and the impact that it was having on students who were not white. Well, after I completed the barrage of sessions with those individuals, ultimately I sat with the president of the school, and it was he, upon the completion of our session, it was he who contacted the monitor of the residence hall where I was and asked him if he would talk to me and try to convince me not to withdraw. Well, he made the mistake of not telling this guy, who of course was white, my rationale for withdrawing. So he arrived at his own conclusion. Because I was Black, he decided that it must have been that I was having academic difficulty. And so that was how he made approach to me. You don't think you could manage a D average for the semester? Well, it was then my privilege to report to him that I was on the dean's list. I had a 3.9 grade point average. And it was that revelation that turned him all kinds of shades of red, because he was convinced that my difficulty had to have been a lack of academic prowess.
So ultimately, you did decide to stay at Etown?
Ultimately, yes. Well, I never had any intention of withdrawing, but I went through the process because it gave me an opportunity to talk about racism.
Yeah, so he was a very intelligent man about the way he kind of went about handling things on Elizabethtown College, because you realistically, this is a technique that not many people would have even thought to go about on his campus to be able to address, because at that time it was hard to talk to like kind of like the faculty, like the institution to be able to address certain issues. So the only way realistically that he felt that he would be able to do this on a proper to even address the president, address important issues on campus back then was to be able to do this and go through this process. So he went through another instance so again with the 8 demands. So this next clip should be
My
about
time
that
there
process.
was a nightmare, really, literally, because
And so when you say racism, like, so speaking on encouraging, what encouraged you guys to formulate the 18 demands and then be able to push them forward and feel confident enough to be able to hopefully get it done?
well, this is very interesting. I invited the Black students to my room one evening to discuss racism. And by the time, the session concluded, the word had spread all over campus that we were going to burn down the campus, all over the campus. We were going to burn it down. That's the kind of ridiculous stereotyping that obtained there. And it was nonstop. As I said earlier, it was blatant, bold, brazen.
When the faculty heard that though, so did they do any follow up on you guys? Did they bring you guys in for like questioning? If that was a rumor that's being spread?
The interesting thing is that they arranged a session for the next day, and I remember it as if it were yesterday. We were in a conference room with a long table, and I was the only student that arrived. Everyone else, you know, they were administrators, I guess, maybe faculty. Everyone else was white. And on each end of the table, they had gigantic tape recorders. And so the entire session was recorded. I guess I was supposed to have been intimidated, but I was not. And the prevailing sentiment at the conclusion of this session was, "My, you are very articulate for someone like you."
So yeah, just not appropriate. Yeah. What kind of questions were they asking you? Do you remember?
Well, they were more concerned about Black students burning down the campus. So most of the inquisition was in that regard.
Was this before or after the 18 demands that we saw later? Before. Yeah.
So I had a question about the language that was kind of used within what was the writing, because what I saw from the start was that you guys referred to it as expectations, and there were 6 expectations, and you guys specifically declared that you would rather it be called expectations and not demands. And then in the next thing, it was changed towards 18 demands. So why did you make that difference, and why did you guys make that change?
Primarily because of the rumors that were spreading, that and as I said, there were only a handful of Black students at that time. But the rumors were that even though we were small in number, we had the means to destroy the campus, and we had every intention to do so.
So do you think that's the reason why, when the school or the president received the demands, that's the reason why they said no to everything on the list?
Well, there was merely no inclination to address the issue of racism in that institution, period. The only reason they were concerned about my pending departure was because it wasn't because they had any affinity toward me as a human being, but because there were only a few Black students. At that time, federal funding was somehow related to the number of minority students. So that if you lost minority students, you ran the risk of losing federal funding. That was their only concern in that regard.
Did they offer anything to you, to like any incentive whatsoever to try and keep you or other Black students on campus? Because
No.
they knew they would risk losing you guys.
No.
So during that period of time, like you mentioned, the federal funding aspect, so money at the school was something that was kind of important for them. Because the thing is that the school when they would go to like their budget meeting, so I was able to kind of like look through some like the records and the meeting minutes of some like the board of trustees and like some of the conversations they were having with like within the administration. And they were talking about like how the financial situation of the school was. So the school would suggest that they would be able to make a certain amount of money, but the money that they would actually bring in was far less than that. So they would be calling for saying that they would make $4 million, but they would only be actually having $2 million. So the school's financial situation was very most recently about why they kind of were saying no towards the Asian demands was that and I think it was April, they had a conversation. Sorry, excuse me. I think it was about March, yeah. So they in March they had a meeting, and in that meeting they were kind of discussing like what their financial situation was, and they realized that they didn't necessarily have enough money in general to support a lot of stuff on the campus. So in my head, when I read this and I saw that they didn't have enough money, I was like, okay, so maybe it makes sense for them to say that they're not going to be able to support the Asian demands. Fine, I understand that. The next month comes by, and then they're sitting down there forecasting to be able to upgrade the whole entire campus. So they were talking about adding multiple new things. They were talking about adding new dorms, parking lots, multiple new sports fields. I think it was softball. They were going to have a playground on campus. They were going to have multiple tracks, soccer fields. They were talking about these big plans that they had to basically add all this type of stuff that upgrade the whole entire Etown College. But that would take a lot of money, would it not? So then the next month comes around and it's like about the first week when they have the 80 demands come through. The 80 demands is a plan that would have required money. But the thing is that that plan, the 80 demands specifically, wouldn't have been as costly as a plan of upgrading the campus, which then it comes down to when they came down and addressed the situation and then they said no, the understanding is what was the thought process behind that. And it was clear the thought process behind it was that they had their priorities and the students of color were not the priority at that period of time. Because in the understanding of how that upgrade would be, it would be 1,000 times more costly because you have to put upfront money towards the things that you're pushing through compared to what the Asian Mass is being asked of. So in the Asian Mass, what they were asking for was they were asking for kind of like scholarship money. They were asking for as she mentioned earlier, a student like a teacher who was there to support was one of the only teachers of color at that period of time who was there to be able to support the students in full. And they felt that that student, like that teacher was not getting paid the same amount as the other teachers that were there. And they were trying to advocate for her. They were trying to find ways to be able to have like for inflation during the period of time, they wanted to have like kind of like matching funds to be able to help them be able to stay in school. So it was like they were asking for instances that were able to be easily applicable due to the fact that they already didn't have a lot of students of color in the first place. And some of the other things that they were also asking for was having students of color on the mission team to be able to help bring more students of color on campus. So the whole understanding of Asian advantage was to be able to create a safe environment for students of color, and not only create a safe environment, create one that's stable, and then find more ways to bring students of color onto campus. But the fact that the Elizabethtown College, as soon as they, like not the college, but the institution administration at that time had brought him through and only was focusing on the made up threat that was tossed around the campus and then asking questions, but not really inquiring further on what the Asian advantage was about and trying to find out ways to be able to implement it on the school was something of interest to me. And due to the fact that like, this is what I'm looking at, this is what the environment, this is what the community kind of says about the college, if this is what their priority was. So the whole kind of like the big thing that I kind of got from it was that Elizabethtown College is a welcoming school. But the thing is that they welcome the students, but like that's kind of the first that they kind of did at those times. To bring them onto the campus and then kind of take a step back and let them fend for themselves. So it was holistically kind of very interesting when I see like this is like my understanding of like what the message is throughout my research, but nowadays to see like what a little bit the difference is and what the changes are. So they wanted to be able to have like some type of support system, so kind of like groups and ways that we intertwine with the faculty, and now we offer that today. So we have a Ubuntu mentorship program, and that's like a program I'm a part of. So students of color who first come on campus, we offer now a mentorship program where we offer them support groups. So basically, whenever they feel like they need to like address issues and they want to be able to connect with students of color on campus, older students, they have that now in place. So they also have easier ways to connect with faculty and administration now too as well, because the person in charge of that, Darcy Mills and Javita Thompson, they kind of are people now where they have those chances. So it does, like from my research, I have seen that the period of time Elizabethtown College has changed and they have made their efforts. to kind of help make students of color more comfortable onto the campus community. But again, it still like has like those instances where that said like it's welcoming, but sometimes not all the time where you are able to feel that you are welcome. But yeah, any questions?
Has um, did Mr. Jackson, indicate that, that there was, a reconciliation, with the school at any time for himself or for with his group? Did he go into that
Yeah.
at all?
So he didn't get any reconciliation. The most that they got was a letter, kind of like saying that, oh, like these are the issues that we would like to kind of like push, like we think they're important and that we like to recognize. But then the rest of them, we are not going to do it because we do not believe it's financially possible for us to be able to apply any of that stuff.
I think the only thing he mentioned was, within the faculty, I think it actually was within the religious studies department, a group of, well, he didn't mention this, but we found it in our
It's in the
research.
history book.
Yeah, had gone together to create a scholarship for Black students. But, yeah, Mr. Jackson specifically, I mean, he immediately, the first time I talked to him on the phone, said that, like, I have never been back to campus. I will never step foot on that campus again
So there
because of
wasn't-
what happened
It
to
wasn't
me.
really a reconciliation.
No, not for him. I was so, I couldn't believe that he was willing to talk to us, because I've also talked to other people more recently on the phone who said, you don't want to hear my story. I don't want to talk about this. Like this is, so I thought it was very generous of him to share his story.
The Chet Williamson's book, the 100th anniversary book, mentioned that about 19 or 20 professors did form a group that each professor donated, I think, several $100s to a fund to provide scholarship aid. It was a really generous thing that they did. It was their own money. It wasn't from the administration. So I thought that was good, but I'm sorry to hear that there was. And I'm wondering is he still living?
Yeah,
Miss-
yeah, we talked to him.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
talked to
just
him
this
literally,
summer.
I think it was, yeah.
I think we need to reach out. And since I'm on the board of trustees, we can probably do that. Thank you.
Yeah, just, I'm more interested in the current atmosphere. So what year are you? I'm
What's up?
sophomore. A little bit about, do you feel support? Is there still prejudice on campus? I mean, a little bit
Yeah.
of your perspective.
So me personally, I've had a good time at the campus and I do feel supported. So, because I kind of put myself out there a lot. So when it comes down to like needing help and making sure that I get that help, I kind of always going into those avenues. But there's some people who don't sometimes feel comfortable to kind of voice what they feel or voice what their opinions are. So then they have a little bit more of a difficult time in that. So there is prejudice on the campus. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not, because there have been like kind of like issues within like the dorm spaces where people are making offensive comments and making disrespectful statements or whatnot. So it's like those things are still happening, and there is, as he was saying, bold and brazen. Some of those comments are just as such, but this institution does make ways to kind of address it. So right now there's been issues at the campus, but we've been having like circle talk conversations. So essentially that's kind of like we do like a restorative justice practice. So we all, and like all the RAs are holding it, so we all kind of like sit in a circle and we have conversations about like our community, like as Elizabethtown College, addressing like those type of issues and addressing those topics and kind of having conversations about like hate and like, how that operates within our campus space. So like in instances like it's still there, but the school is trying to find ways to be able to kind of like work in a way to be able to ensure that they don't continue. But obviously people are going to come through with their ideologies, and they're going to, once they find people who also align with them, they're going to feel more comfortable to say hateful things. So at the end of the day, I like it's still a competitive thing because that's how it operates in the world. So it's going to also operate here too as well. But the way the campus is kind of trying to combat that is that they also have a lot of things for diversity. They're talking about like certain conversations about racism and kind of just trying to enlighten the campus community and like kind of like push this stuff out, because like this presentation as well, like that's another example of us kind of having like some of those difficult conversations about race. So they still have this instance, race, LGBTQ plus too as well. Like I know that's another aspect, a group that also can receive like a lot of prejudice or hate towards them as well. So like in the in the end of it, I think that the school has definitely make balance to create a safe environment, but not everybody feels comfortable to operate in that environment because they don't necessarily feel safe regardless of what the school label it as. If that makes sense.
It does. Now, what about the town? Do you feel
Yeah.
comfortable being in town at night?
So I don't like realistically because it's dark, like I don't like going out in the space like that. But I don't like before when I first came, I didn't know about those like past things before. So I kind of did go into the town, but I didn't necessarily feel like that type of stuff. Like obviously like how like the Trump flags or whatnot, but in my mindset, like I don't assume because someone is part of a certain group that they're going to be a certain way right off the bat. So like I did feel comfortable. But I did hear the stories where people have dealt with racist stuff in the town, like within like the past years or so, like I guess you could say pretty recent if it's like in the last 3 to 4 years. So for me, I haven't dealt with it, but there are people who do not feel comfortable in the town.
Did you do any research on the policy changes that the school made throughout the years, or?
I would like to talk about, but I haven't done that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's been, I mean, some of that came through in his newspaper research, but and we've been looking through things like, board records and that type of thing. And we've seen, yeah, I think particularly related to recruitment of Black students, that's where we've seen major changes over time, just because like, Kaylin said, when they came through the 18 demands, one of the things was just basically like try to recruit Black students and have admission counselors who are focusing on that. And that's certainly a change that's been made over time.
Yeah, because also on top of that, like for the bringing in students on campus, they used to require that they take pictures too as well. Like that right there for
Yes.
Ross and Griffin, so they had them
Yeah.
taking pictures and they would have to like write ethnicity or whatnot. And I think that some people like what the suggestion was that because they were doing that, like that's how they knew whether or not a student was of color. And then sometimes it's like they kind of like I guess they like even if they had a certain amount, like one a certain number to come to the school. So it's like that's how they kind of gauge whether or not they'll decide to make the decision of someone comes.
That the picture thing was actually interesting, and it was in the 18 demands. There was this demand that they no longer institute the housing code for was it specifically female students?
Yeah.
But we got the explanation from one of the people we interviewed, Rosalind Griffin. She was, I think, class of 61, and she mentioned that they would use those pictures to make sure that they housed Black female students with other Black female students. And her and one of her friends had basically, a white friend had a protest where they basically they made sure that they weren't being housed together. And they ended up that the Dean of Women, Vera Hackman, just brought her into her office and said, like, we know what you're doing and we need to stop this. So we don't know when that changed, that they didn't make Black women housed with other Black women, but we're talking to a woman who's still alive who can talk about what happened. Also had issues too with sitting in the dining hall. It wasn't a rule, but like clearly they would institute something where all of the Black students would sit together in the dining hall versus, so yeah, just clearly like things were going on, and not always written down, but because that Kaylin has done these interviews, we've been able to learn more from the people who actually experience these things.
There was mention earlier about Sally Johnson and her friend being from Mississippi. Barb Swigert, what was Barb Swigert's dad's name? Harold? Barb's father was a member here, and he did BVS in Mississippi. And I think A.C. Bulger, the former president back in the 40s and 50s, also had a connection with Mississippi too. It seems to me that sometimes our church was able to relate to Black folks far away better than they could in town. I've asked that question many times, and Paul Rice asked that question too. Why didn't we make a bigger difference in the local community? It's easier to make a difference far away.
It was really helpful to, I don't know, people know Paul Rice, but,
Yes, they all do.
yeah, okay. He was the only white person that we have interviewed so far, but some of it was just because of his age. He was a class of 55. He was able to tell us, and he had gone to school with Sally Johnson.
And many of the other earlier
Yeah.
students of color. He was friends with a lot of them.
And Sally was the May Queen, correct?
Paul also had witnessed, he had, I was shocked at how late, the Etown Elks were having, minstrel shows. And so Paul had actually gone to one of these minstrel shows and was, even as a student in the 50s, was shocked by what he saw.
Blackface and so.
How many black students are enrolled now today?
I don't know.
I'm not sure the correct
And
percentage.
minorities or international students, any idea?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Now, the
It's
year,
not, I mean, it's not a high percentage.
yeah, the year of demands, what year was that, the 18 demands?
1970.
1970, who was the president?
Morley Mays, wasn't
Spiegler, or was it?
Yeah, I think it was one of those.
Morley Mays.
Yeah.
Morley.
Hayes, okay.
it? And he wasn't here, so I
Didn't
think
know.
the first response came from the dean.
It did.
Yeah, it did. They actually met with the dean first.
Dean Miller,
Yeah,
and I think he was a member here.
Okay.
yeah. He was the first person that just, like, the students actually all came into his room and had like a conversation with him first, because they couldn't go see the president, so he was the first person to interact with the whole eighth demands thing, and the first person to address it, and then we brought the president, and then after we saw like what he mentioned after, having that meeting and whatnot. Any other questions?
So interesting here today, because this dovetails, all the other Sundays we've been having meetings on, racial issues, and, this is a really nice dovetail to our other meetings. And, we've been talking about the sundown towns of Elizabethtown and Manheim Township, where, blacks were not allowed in town overnight, could not buy homes, and could not convey property, could not be buried at Tunnel Hill Cemetery. And this has been a series we've been doing, and I talked to you about this before, Rachel, but, can I tell a story about the ink spots?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So Peggy's parents went to school here. Her grandparents taught here. I think you had given me some pictures from the 20s of her grandfather, Isaac Ryder, brother and preacher, taught at the college. Her parents came in, I think, 1940 as undergrad at Etown. And there's a famous story about, from the historic district, I've heard more about this from the locals. The ink spots, her father played trumpet, was in a band, and also baseball. And in 1940, a famous band called the Ink Spots, black musical band, came to campus. They had a presentation on campus, and they were met at the border. The whole town was outraged. The police met the Ink Spots bus at the Hershey Etown line, escorted them to the college. The police chief staked out the college during the night, and then from the neighbors told me at the Historic Society, several townsfolk with pickup trucks came in with long guns and staked out the campus. I don't know what they were thinking, but I was reminded when you said about burning down the campus. And then they had the presentation in the gym. And then when they left, they were escorted back by the group and the police back to the line. Since it was a sundown town, no blacks allowed overnight. And they went on their way without incident. And I heard at the Historic Society, the neighbors filling me in on what their remembrances of this. And they said, oh, it did happen. And we always thought it was a crazy story that her dad told at the farm, about the ink spots, but it's been corroborated. So I really appreciate you coming here today. This is a great dovetail to our discussion with Jerry a few weeks ago and covering the same subjects.
I'd also like to add about that incident. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with James Lowen. He's a famous sociologist, and he did a lot of work on sundown towns. He wrote perhaps what would be considered the most comprehensive research about sundown towns in this country, and that incident is actually mentioned in his book
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, good.
So I would highly recommend checking out that book if you're
Yeah.
interested. It's very comprehensive.
What's the name of the book again?
Sundown Town's A History of Racism in America, I believe, something like that.
He died just 4 years
Yeah,
ago.
he died very recently, but he did a lot of work on documenting sundown towns throughout America.
The four towns in Lancaster County were Conestoga, Manheim, Etown, and New Holland.
Oh,
The ink spots, if you look up the ink spots in Wikipedia, it'll tell you, you can see their itinerary through the years, and in June of 1940, they performed at Etown College and Mount Gretna.
oh, really?
It's all there.
I heard about Montreal.
What you were talking about.
Same
though,
day, same day.
But what you were talking about was actually something that had been like a consistent thing that happened throughout the college. So when groups of people of color, so like I mentioned before, the post dancers, when they came on college, they had to stay in the campus when they were there. So like the faculty, like they would actually have those people stay there because it's like the outer community was not welcoming towards it. So that what you just spoke about was kind of the consistent thing that would occur. Like they even had Angela Davis come onto the campus at one point too as well. And that already was also protested, not by just by the outer community, but also from the students too as well. But like that was still like a highly attended thing that brought a lot of people come onto the campus.
I've lived in town since,
No, you're good.
I've lived in town since 97. And all my life as a white person, I walk without any self-consciousness of my whiteness. I don't have to worry about where I shop or driving while white. And because that's white, I'm white. And I just have to think about what's it like to be a person of color walking around Etown at night or driving or shopping. And I think that's it's the microaggressions and the racism that we think we don't have. I may not even know it or think it or perceive it, but a person of color will. And it's just a constant internal dialogue and puzzle as to how we navigate this. And it's an important issue, and it's not going to be solved tomorrow. Our current political and cultural climate seems like it's going backwards. And the college has to change its wording so it doesn't lose federal funds. It's just a bad time. And the conversation about what do people of color perceive, the microaggressions even, that needs to be in the mix constantly, because I need to hear those things, because I don't know it. Do you get my puzzlement?
Yeah.
I'm going to applaud your research. I feel like it's really balanced and sets itself in the context of a lot of things, but it doesn't have an agenda of trying to push something in a particular way. So I really applaud you and Rachel for your good research.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're still doing interviews. Actually, I think I set up an interview soon with the class of 65 graduates. So we've been trying to talk to people who graduated roughly before 1975 in particular, just we figure, this is our chance. But we are also interviewing, I think the most recent was class of 2011. So we are people who are willing to share their stories. We appreciate it. We also understand too when people, don't want to talk about these things. I understand that too. But yeah, we appreciate any help too with recruitment.
Rachel, in your research, have you found other cases of people doing research on this topic, or is this are we aware of other attempts to try and recover these stories 20 years ago or 10 years ago, or do you in your process of doing this research, you're like, huh, we're the first people kind of asking these questions about the history of this school?
I do know that one of the professors at the school had done research on one of the students I had talked about, William Miller Barber. They did that with a few students a couple years ago. I'm not sure of any
Actually,
other
Yeah,
instances
yeah,
that have been
the,
made to document this.
the former archivist at, Elizabethtown, Peter DePoit, if folks know him, he got very interested in William Miller Barber and shared, the research that he had found with Jean-Paul Benowitz, who I know some of you know. And so, he's been working with some students on trying to elevate that story in particular. But other than that, I don't know of any major projects. I'm sure there have been, I'm sure, you know, being an educational institution, there have been years. But actually, so the centennial history of Elizabethtown College, which you can still get, and we have on our website at the archives, Uniting Work and Spirit does have some of these stories, like the ink thought stories, and talks about the 18 demands. So it's not something that the college hasn't discussed, but this is probably, especially the oral history aspect that Caitlin's doing.
Well, thank you for
Yeah.
doing this work. It's very important. And thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Yeah, like right.